Welcome back to The World This Week with me, Phill Reece. Well, under an agreement between NATO and the Afghan government, the foreign combat mission in Afghanistan is due to end on December 31st, 2014, when the Afghan army and the police are to have full responsibility for their country's security. Well, it seems that the end game is now unfolding as the various stakeholders jostle for position. As we've heard in relation to the aid workers, the violence is increasing. But that often happens in the final stages of such conflicts as groups try to strengthen their hand at a future negotiating table. Well, last night we heard that 2 US drone strikes in the Pakistan tribal regions killed at least 9 people, including a senior commander in the Afghan Taliban. But aside from the violence, there are gestures being made by all sides as they prepare for the NATO withdrawal. The Pakistan Taliban said they want to negotiate a ceasefire, though they refuse to disarm. The veteran Afghan militant leader, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, spoke to the Daily Telegraph this week. From his mountain hideaway, he declared that he wants a peaceful transition to a new administration based on, quote, free and fair elections. Well, that may surprise some. But the latest development is the release by Pakistan of 8 members of the Afghan Taliban. Before we try to work out what all this means, here's Emily Churchill with the details.
The release of 8 members of this group, the Afghan Taliban, by Pakistan this week has been welcomed as a positive step for the peace process in Afghanistan. The move has long been a demand of the Afghan government, which hopes allowing members of the militant group to walk free will help draw Taliban leaders into a political agreement.
قدم باشه و اقدام باشه که کمک کنه پروسه صلح افغانستان تا باشه که مخالفین مسلح دولت جمهوری اسلامی افغانستان با آزادی ای تعداد از رهبران طالب و افراد مربوط به تحریک طالبان که اخیراً آزاد شده سوی پاکستان حاضر شوند به میز مذاکره با دولت جمهوری اسلامی افغانستان.
Cautious optimism about a political settlement to the bloody crisis in Afghanistan was also brought about by an unprecedented meeting at a French hotel in December, which brought Afghan officials and their political rivals, including the Taliban, around the same table. The group sent 2 delegates to the informal talks, although it is still refusing to enter into official negotiations with President Karzai's government. Significantly, the representative said the Taliban was not looking for a monopoly on power and that it would be willing to rule alongside other political groups. But critics have dismissed the apparent softening of the Taliban's position as a propaganda move, saying it's too early to hope that the Taliban is moving away from armed attacks and toward political engagement. Others worry about the impact political compromise with the Taliban might have on the rights of Afghanistan's female population, like these women who are preparing to become members of the police force. After a month when several Afghan police were killed in insider attacks by their colleagues, they know the dangers, but still they train, in preparation for the withdrawal of foreign combat troops in 2014. There's no doubt they too will be hoping that by then, some kind of political settlement with the Taliban will have been reached. Emily Churchill, Islam Channel.
Well, I'm joined today by Paul Schult, a Senior Associate at Carnegie Europe and Visiting Fellow at King's College London. Paul was also the head of the UK's Post-Conflict Reconstruction Unit in Afghanistan in 2004. We also have Asim Khan, of course, from Imran Khan's party, and he stays with us for this part, so thank you for that. Finally, on the phone from Kabul, we have the Afghan MP, Fawzia Kufi, who is also the chairman of Women's Rights and who also plans to run in the 2014 presidential election. Paul Schult, can I start with you? What is going on here? We have, Taliban militia up in a French chateau. It's an odd situation now. What's happening?
Well, I think your news snippet caught the realities quite well. People are feeling around shadow boxing, testing each other's reliability. Everybody knows that the situation will be transformed when the Western troops leave. Does that mean the Taliban are serious about trying to enter into a political agreement, or are they going to see the chance for a real military takeover when the drones, the bombers, the tanks leave, and it's just the relatively unsupported Afghans? The answer is we don't know. I'm
sceptical. When you say unsupported, you mean that the army, the Afghan army and the Afghan police is being trained up, you think are actually basically a shambles?
No, I didn't say that. We know the Afghan...
compared to the Taliban, can they stand up to the Taliban?
We know that the Afghan police are a problem area. The army shows areas of success, other areas of weakness, but they certainly aren't going to have the heavy equipment and the technology that the American and British and European contingents have brought. So And there's also a longer-term problem about the affordability. About 360,000 Afghan security personnel. NATO has said it will make $2.5 billion available after 2015. That won't be enough. So there will be fewer Afghan security forces, and they will be less well equipped. In those circumstances, what does one think the Taliban are going to do? Will they actually want to make a deal, or will they take advantage of relative military strength by then?
Well, that's a fair point. I mean, what do you think, Asim Khan? I mean, obviously, if there's a stalemate now, and then you get rid of 100,000 foreign troops and all their heavy weaponry, I mean, the Taliban can win. Why would they negotiate?
I think it's basically you are coming to the final stages of that conflict. And in any conflict historically as well, that there has to be a sense of dialogue. You cannot have these conflicts carried on. And Afghanistan has seen much more share of it's what the other countries have seen. So at the end of the day, and Imran Khan and the PTI over the years have consistently maintained that view that we need to have a dialogue with them. And within that dialogue, you will get to see the patterns as well, that there are people within the Taliban who will be willing to sit on the table and go through the peace process. And through that process, you will also be able to filter out those people as well who have nothing, who do not actually want to sit on the tables. And then it'll be much easier approach for the Afghan security as well and for the police as well to actually combat that. But other than that, there is no other way. I mean, Afghanistan has for the last 35 years or 40 years or so, I mean, the infrastructure is not there. It has to be rebuilt, and it cannot be just that the NATO is saying that in 2015 they'll be offering $2.5 billion of pounds. It has to be a very comprehensive program for Afghanistan, which will actually stabilize its infrastructure as well, which will bring women as well, which will bring all the Afghan nationals that are outside Afghanistan, either the writers or the poets or the doctors, they have to go back. So once
you think the Taliban then will actually sit around a table, make a deal with the Karzai government, with the remnants of the old Ahmad Shah Massoud army that's now got power do you think they'll actually do that?
I think, Phil, basically, if you look at the whole composition of Afghanistan, that basically what you have the Gulbuddin Hikmatyars and the Pashtun belt, then you have the northern sort of belt as well. At the end of the day, it's the same lot. They may have...
Well, it's a divided country, though.
It's a divided country.
Pashtun majority, of course. Pashtun are equals with the Tajiki population there.
So you need to have that representation of those proportions onto the table where the government can sit with the Pashtun and the Tajiks and everybody, and to resume that peace process and to start the talk. At least we need to start having the talk as well.
I mean, Fawzia Kufi, you've been listening to that. I mean, do you believe that you can actually have meaningful dialogue with the Taliban?
It's a very confusing situation right now because we hear so many processes. First of all, there is the Qatar process, which basically includes a lot of involvement from U.S. There is, of course, other processes. In particular, there have been some meetings in France, in Paris. More meetings are coming up. The important point here is for the negotiation. There were other militant groups in the past involved in war in Afghanistan, like the different Mujahideen group. When they came to join Afghan government, they had to put weapons and violence away before actual negotiation and their reintegration and their disarmament start. So if we would like to talk with Taliban, either it's a U.S. or Afghan government or anybody, including United Nations, they need to keep in mind few points. First of all, they need to make sure that Taliban actually put guns and violence away. Second, they need to make sure that the Taliban respects Afghan constitution, because that is a red line for us. Third, they need to ensure that Taliban actually disassociate themselves with those intelligence, that they receive funding and they receive training and they receive support, and they become honest, at least political part of the political process in Afghanistan.
But they're not going to accept that, though, are they? Fawzia, I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're not going to accept that. I mean, you tell them to disarm. I mean, the whole of the Pashtun areas, basically every man's got a gun. I mean, how can you ask them to accept a constitution that they've already rejected?
I don't buy this idea of Pashtun and non-Pashtun. Actually, this is a phenomenon that has been basically promoted by the intelligence of the region. Not only Pashtuns are Taliban, there are other elements within Taliban who are from different neighboring countries. To be honest, I don't think that Taliban are just an Afghan element. So for those part of Taliban that they claim to be Afghans and they would like to be part of a democratic process, they need to give an assurance to the public, to the people in Afghanistan, to the women group, to the civil society group, to the people of Afghanistan that they have disassociated themselves with those groups who have already had links with Al-Qaeda, who have right now have links with intelligence. There has to be somehow a green light by both sides for peace and negotiations to start, at least for the dialogue to start. Now, the government of Afghanistan, I think, have already shown a lot of green lights in terms of pursuing the peace process. It's time for Taliban to demonstrate willingness, to demonstrate that they are happy, they're willing to be part of this process. Otherwise, if we basically bribe Taliban politically just to have an exit under the name of successful exit, it's not going to bring peace in Afghanistan.
Okay, well, listen, bear with us. Thank you for that, Fawzia. Please stay with us. We'll come back to you in a minute. I just want to put some of those points to Paul Schultz. I mean, obviously, she's making a lot of very reasonable demands that the Taliban do effectively lay down weapons and accept the constitution, which, of course, has guarantees for women in it in terms of the constitution set up by, effectively, overseen by the West in 2001. Now, I mean, how do you see the possibilities of that? I mean, is that possible?
I think there's every reason to try and do it. I mean, everyone thinks...
Well, that's not answering my question, though.
Well, it's good to try and do something you have to do, isn't it? You may have doubts about how far it will succeed, but to try and draw the Taliban into a process is worth something. It will be necessary, not just you can be sure that the Afghan government and its allies will be watching very closely what the Taliban do, and promises that they might make of the sort that Fawzia is suggesting will be watched closely. But it's a duplicitous area. Remember, this is an area where the Pakistani ISI is insisting it has no connection.
Fawzia did say the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, that's the military intelligence arm of Pakistan, should leave Afghan well alone. Well, is that going to happen?
But it won't. Its interest may become less pressing and less selfish if it gets some kind of regional deal with India, but it certainly isn't going to leave Pakistan entirely alone. And that's one of the deniable realities which everybody knows and everyone will be watching. So I go back to my earlier summing up. There's a great deal of distrust in this situation, but this is a process that has to be tried. And then, step by step, see how far the Taliban do begin to keep the promises that one hopes to draw them into.
I mean, Asim Khan, is the West wrong to basically see Afghanistan as a divided country, or at least Western commentators now, to see the Pashtun, the Taliban as sort of Pashtun national army, and of course Kazai is Pashtun, but the majority of the people now are Tajik. I mean, how can these problems be resolved? I mean, is Afghanistan really a country?
I think over the years, basically what has happened, Phil, that all these different definitions of, I mean, some factions is supported by the West, so there used to be the Pashtun belt. Then there was some factions which the Soviet Unions were working on with the Tajiks and with the Uzbeks as well, and all their influences in the north. So I think, as Fawzia was saying, basically, that first of all, that you have to accept the cultural aspect as well, that they've carried guns over the years, over the 1,000 years of weapons. So it has to be, and the process has to be linked with certain measurable objectives as well. That you're not just actually asking them to come onto the table and you just put your demand. You have to engage them into the proper decision as well, which relates towards Afghanistan. The moment they start to engage as well, all the other factions, the so-called the Talibans or whether the Pakistanis or anybody for that matter, they will filter out. They will disappear basically because the line of communication will be completely finished. They will become part of the process, and which we've always said that the moment you actually start bringing these people onto the tables, that the criminal aspect will be minimized and you will be actually able to identify them. At the moment, everybody talks about Taliban, but nobody can actually define who they are.
But it's not just Taliban, is it? I mean, we're talking about, for example, in the west of the country, we're talking about Ismail Khan, who's very close to the Iranians. And, I mean, many of these characters, I mean, I've met them 20, 25 years ago, and they're still there now, these warlords, and they're all representing interests that are there to basically not unite Afghanistan.
And that obviously is a very important message for all the regional countries as well, that Iran, be it Pakistan, be it India, that they really have to let this thing. Afghanistan has to be, as a country, they have to safeguard their own interests as well, and we should not be intervening at all, basically. Where, as a country to country, where we ask for support, whether it's an education program, or obviously countries do that, but we should not be interfering. Otherwise, this perception will carry on, it'll become a fact, and the peace process will not actually ensure its outcomes as well. So I think Pakistani governments, and the same goes for Iran as well, that we as a country, we have to, Pakistan has to focus on itself first. We have enough problems on our own.
You know, Fawzia Kufi, I mean, you heard earlier the quotes from Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, another character, of course, from the war in the 1980s, saying that he believed in free and fair elections. Of course, in 1992, there was an agreement between many of the former warlords, and certainly Hekmatyar went on to effectively destroy much of Kabul when that broke down. Do you believe he's changed?
Before commenting on this particular question, allow me to comment on your previous question about whether Afghanistan is the country and if there is a nation. I understand the Western, I mean, some of the commentators and in the West and even some of our neighboring countries' perspective, it's a tribal country divided by tribes and ethnicity, which the reality of Afghanistan is, it is a divided country, but in the meantime, there is common interest and people of Afghanistan stand by their national interest when need be. Remember during Taliban, the so-called, what is commonly called now the Northern Alliance, which was a composition of people from East, people from West, people from all over the country stood against Taliban. So when there is a need, even the state structures were not very strong in terms of having police and army, but people stood against a joint enemy. And even during the Soviet Union occupation, people from no matter which part of the country stood against that. So this brings us to the point that there is a nation. Unfortunately, this nation has been so much weakened by this propaganda from our regional countries and enemies of Afghanistan by saying that this is a broken nation and it's not a nation, it's just a tribal country, which I, to some extent, I oppose. In the meantime, understand that it's a divided country by ethnicity, which is a reality of Afghanistan. But there are other, this could be used as a strength of Afghanistan. Going to the Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's recent statement, he had two main points. One, he said, post-2014, the Afghanistan may change to 1992. And then the main comment was that we need to have a peaceful transition and fair and time election. We welcome, actually, his state of referring to election. I'm happy to see that there is at least somehow, even if it's on the media, and even if it's for the sake of his engagement or making him engaged in the peace process, he's making a good comment, at least. We appreciate that. Anybody who would like to come to democracy, come to the people, appreciate the fact that the people can be the decision maker. We welcome them and we appreciate them. But in the meantime, I think people in Kabul will remember that Kabul was basically destroyed by those people. And we shouldn't forget that his party, Hizb Islami of the government party, is almost the ruling party. So who are we talking when we say Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Hizb Islami party? Basically, we are talking only about him and few people around him. The whole other party is now in the government.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, look, I want to just one more comment that Hekmatyar made was that he didn't actually oppose the education of girls. I know it's something you've long campaigned for and a very contentious issue there. But he said, of course, that boys and girls should be educated separately. Now, that's been told to me, by the way, by Taliban people as well, that they do not oppose the education of girls, but perhaps where there are not enough schools, then boys have had priority. I mean, you know, what's your bottom line in terms of accepting the traditions of, you know, the Pashtuns in that kind of very religious perspective when it comes to issues like that?
I think in those issues we need to listen to the people. Perhaps 15 years back when Taliban were ruling Afghanistan, many traditional people wanted to send their girls to the mosque instead of to the school. And many boys went to the only male school. But right now things are changing in Afghanistan. And I think any smart and clever leader will have to adjust themselves to the demands of the nation. Right now I think even women in Kandahar and in Orizgan, they would like to see their daughters go to school. They would like to see their daughters get educated. So if Taliban or Hizb Islami or any other party would like to get involved in elections and would like to gain the support and votes of people, they would both in terms of the men of the society, but also the women of the society. They have to listen to their women voters as well. If they would like to not rule through weapons and guns, they have to listen to both voices. And I think things have really changed in the past 10 years in terms of perspective change. This is one of the things that hardly been reported to the media.
Very briefly, Fawzia, very briefly, do you believe that the West is maybe betraying the women of Afghanistan by leaving in 2014? Very quickly, if you can.
There are risks, and perhaps women rights and women gains might be one of those things that will be at risk. But in the meantime, we are hopeful that the Western world will not abandon Afghanistan.
Okay, Fawzia, thank you very much. Just briefly, coming back to Paul Schulte here. I mean, you know, look, viewers here might wonder, what was this war all about? I mean, it's been going on for 12 years. I mean, you know, what do you think it will achieve then, very quickly?
It's up to us now and the Afghans to come up with possibilities so that when the Western troops leave, it doesn't fall apart. And that's military.
But 12 years of Western, what's it achieved?
Nothing.
It's certainly not achieved what people expected when they began. But it's not over yet. And by providing medical and economic assistance as well as military assistance after the Western troops leave, we've got more chance of enabling Afghanistan to begin to rebuild itself in ways which maybe won't make up entirely for all the losses of the war, but will still be better than just pulling the plug.
Very briefly, Asim, quickly, 15 seconds.
It's basically, I think there has to be a comprehensive plan. You cannot have the same situation as in the 90s, that the same argument is played, we will rebuild Afghanistan, everybody walked away. This time, they better make sure that this country gets back to its feet.
And of course, I think the US administration is now actually considering how many troops it will leave behind, perhaps even tens of thousands, you never know. But that's all we've got time for. Thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with another look behind the global headlines on the world this week. Try and join us if you can. Bye-bye. Assalamu alaikum.